respected us. No matter wherever he went around in the world, he used to phone and let us know he's okay.
Do you remember him in Feltham playing music in the house?
Yes, he used to bring a guitar, and in his own little room he used to ham around all his music, and I sometimes used to tell him, you've got to think about neighbours, it's not very good. And in the end he said it's time that he moved out, which I didn't like.
Have hobbies?
I have not done. Yeah, a lot of sex.
Can you tell us what Queen is all about?
It's basically a rock and roll band with lots of harmonies, lots of everything.
When Freddie Mercury walked onto a stage, the world stopped. He wasn't just a singer, he was a storm of sound, style, and energy. The voice, the presence, the fearlessness. It was like watching lightning in human form. But as the world cheered, very few saw what was happening behind the curtain. In the last year of his life, something changed. The man who once dominated stadiums with a single note began to retreat. He canceled appearances, stopped interviews. Photos became rare, and when they did surface, they sparked a tidal wave of speculation. What was happening to Freddie Mercury? What unfolded in those final months was not just the slow decline of a music icon, but the quiet unraveling of a deeply private man. A man who built a kingdom of sound and spectacle, but died in almost complete silence. And the most haunting part? He made sure it happened that way. This isn't just the story of Queen's rise or Freddie's fame. It's the raw truth behind a life that burned brighter than almost any other, and faded far too soon. From his roots in Zanzibar to the whispers of scandal and heartbreak that followed him until the end, this is the side of Freddie Mercury the world wasn't meant to see. Long before he was crowned a rock god, Freddie Mercury was a shy, artistic boy born into a world of discipline and tradition. Born Farrokh Bulsara in 1946 on the island of Zanzibar, off the coast of East Africa, his early life was anything but glamorous. The Bulsaras were a conservative Parsi family. His father worked as a cashier for the British Colonial Office, and while their life was stable, it was deeply rooted in custom and modesty. There were no signs then that Farrokh would someday become Freddie. No glitter, no stage lights, just a quiet boy who loved to draw and listen to records. But something stirred in him early. His parents, sensing potential, made a decision that would alter his path forever. At the age of 7, he was sent away to St. Peter's School, a British-style boarding school in India. Imagine it, a young boy separated from his family, thrown into a rigid world of discipline, foreign culture, and cold dormitory walls. But instead of retreating, Farrokh adapted, and something incredible happened. It was at St. Peter's that his musical genius first flickered to life. He learned to play the piano, he joined the choir. And more than anything, he developed a deep, almost obsessive connection with music. At just 12 years old, he formed his first band, The Hectics. They played cover songs, Elvis, Little Richard, rock and roll classics, but it wasn't the music that stood out. It was the fire behind it. Farrokh wasn't just performing, he was transforming. Even then, people noticed something magnetic about him. A strange duality. Shy in conversation, electric on stage. A boy who didn't fit in, but didn't care. But destiny had more chaos in store. In 1963, political violence erupted in Zanzibar. The revolution forced the Bulsara family to flee their home and start over in England. Farrokh was 17. And once again, everything changed. They settled in Feltham, a working-class town just outside London. It was colder, tougher, more cynical. But for Farrokh, it was the beginning of something far greater. He enrolled at Ealing Art College, where he studied design, but it wasn't just the classrooms that mattered. It was London itself. The city was buzzing. It was the era of the Beatles, Bowie, and Hendrix. Music poured out of every pub, every alley. Identity, fashion, rebellion, it was all exploding. And Farrokh, newly nicknamed Freddie, didn't just watch. He absorbed everything. He roamed the local music scene, hung out at record shops, and went to every live show he could afford. He wasn't just learning how to perform. He was learning how to become someone unforgettable. And soon, he'd meet the two people who would change his life forever, Brian May and Roger Taylor. But that part of the story starts next. By the late 60s, Freddie Mercury was no longer just an art student. He was a force orbiting the heart of London's underground music scene, drawn to anything bold, theatrical, or rebellious. That's when fate stepped in. Through mutual friends and the tight-knit world of West London gigs, He crossed paths with Brian May and Roger Taylor, two talented musicians in a struggling band called Smile. At first, Freddie was just a fan, offering ideas, giving feedback, but soon his passion became impossible to ignore. He didn't just want to be involved, he wanted to lead. In 1970, Smile was reborn with Freddie Mercury out front and a new name, Queen. It wasn't just a title, it was a declaration. Freddie wasn't content with blending in. He used his art background to design Queen's elaborate crest, a symbol stitched together with the zodiac signs of the band. The name, the logo, the vision, it all came from him. He was building not just a band, but a kingdom. Still, it wasn't instant magic. Their early gigs were raw, loud, and chaotic. Record labels were hesitant. Critics didn't know what to make of them. But Queen refused to bend. They fused hard rock with operatic drama, guitar solos with layered harmonies. They weren't chasing trends, they were inventing a sound that didn't exist yet. By 1973, they released their debut album, and while it wasn't an overnight hit, the fire had started. Each record pushed further, louder, stranger. And in 1975, they struck gold. A Night at the Opera, anchored by the now legendary Bohemian Rhapsody, changed everything. It was 6 minutes of madness, ballads, headbanging, harmonies, and no chorus in sight. Radio stations said it was too long. Listeners couldn't get enough. With that one song, Freddie Mercury rewrote what was possible in rock music. He wasn't just a frontman anymore, he was a showman, a visionary, a provocateur. And Queen? They weren't just rising stars, they were legends in the making. But this was only the beginning. The real transformation was yet to come. As Queen climbed to superstardom, something incredible was happening. Not just with the music, but with Freddie himself. He wasn't just evolving, he was reinventing himself in real time. And the world couldn't look away. The mid to late 70s saw Queen defy every rule. One album would lean into heavy metal, the next into funk, then disco, then gospel. Freddie's songwriting was fearless. Somebody to Love brought gospel harmonies into the rock world. Crazy Little Thing Called Love channeled Elvis with swagger and swing. No sound was off limits. But Queen wasn't just heard, they were seen. And it was Freddie who made sure of that. His onstage presence became pure spectacle. Tight leotards, capes, a crown, a bare chest and a studded armband. He didn't just perform, he erupted. Each concert became a theatrical event, with Freddie strutting across the stage like a man who owned the universe. For fans, it wasn't just music, it was myth-making. By the time the 1980s rolled in, Queen had already conquered the charts. Albums like The Game and Hot Space pushed them into new territories, experimenting with synthesizers, funk, and collaborations. The single Under Pressure with David Bowie wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural reset. And through it all, Freddie was changing too. Gone were the long curls and glam rock glitter. He emerged with a sleek haircut, a rugged mustache, and a defiant new edge. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. A shift from androgynous star to unapologetic icon. Behind the scenes, Freddie was also diving deeper into his personal identity. He'd been surrounded by whispers for years about his sexuality, his relationships, his private life, but he kept the world guessing. He never made statements. He made art. And in songs like Love of My Life or These Are the Days of Our Lives, you could hear it all. The longing, the heartbreak, the vulnerability. On stage, he was larger than life. But in the lyrics, he was just Freddie. Honest, complicated, human. By the mid-80s, Queen had gone from underground oddities to one of the biggest bands in the world. The Magic Tour in 1986 packed stadiums across Europe. At Wembley, over 70,000 people chanted his name. No pyrotechnics, no lasers, just Freddie, a microphone, and an entire generation hanging on every note. But even as the cheers grew louder, something dark was creeping in. Something that no one could see yet. And it would change everything. As the 1980s rolled on, Freddie Mercury remained untouchable on stage, but behind closed doors, his world was beginning to fracture. Fame had never been easy, but now he was carrying a weight that even he couldn't sing his way through. Freddie had always been a master of illusion. He gave the world what it wanted: glamour, confidence, and the illusion of control. But in private, he was deeply complex. His early relationship with Mary Austin, a woman he once called his common-law wife, had ended romantically after he confided in her about his bisexuality. But their bond never broke. Mary remained his closest confidant, the person he trusted with everything, even his will, his home, and the location of his ashes. As Freddie's fame soared, so did the scrutiny. Rumors about his sexuality swirled in tabloids, but he refused to play into the media's narrative. He didn't owe the world his truth, not yet. He had always lived on his own terms, and that wasn't going to change now. In the early 80s, he met Jim Hutton, an Irish hairdresser. Their connection was quiet at first, but deepened into something real, something grounding. As Freddie's public persona grew wilder, his private life with Jim offered stability, dinners at home, time in the garden, ordinary moments that meant everything. But Freddie's personal evolution came with new challenges. The world wasn't kind to men like him, especially not in an era when being openly gay was still considered taboo. And as the AIDS epidemic began to spread, fear and stigma infected everything. Freddie never made a public announcement, never came out in the press. But those close to him knew the truth. And by the late 1980s, something was very wrong. His body began to change. His energy wavered. The fire in his performances was still there, but dimmer, flickering. Yet, he didn't stop. Even as his health declined, he kept recording, kept showing up, refusing to let the world see him as weak, refusing to let a disease define him. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. Somewhere in the late 1980s, though no one knows the exact date, Freddie Mercury received a diagnosis that changed everything. He had AIDS. At the time, the disease was a death sentence. There was no treatment, no hope, and no mercy in the public eye. For most people, a diagnosis like that would mean retreat, hiding. But Freddie? He kept creating. He poured himself into Innuendo, Queen's final album, with him at the helm. And somehow, as his body grew weaker, his voice remained as powerful as ever, maybe even more so. It was as if he was racing against time, recording track after track while he still could, knowing that each might be his last. But outside the studio, the speculation reached a fever pitch. The tabloids were merciless. Photos of a thinner, frailer Freddie surfaced, and the headlines grew crueler by the week. Fans pleaded for answers. Reporters camped outside his home, but Freddie said nothing. He refused interviews, declined comment. He didn't want pity. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to live and die on his own terms. Even those closest to him, his bandmates, friends, family, respected his silence. It wasn't denial. It was dignity. But as 1991 wore on, it became clear to everyone. The end was near. Freddie could no longer walk unassisted. He rarely left his house. And still, he kept recording, right up to the very edge. Then, on November 23, 1991, just one day before his death, he finally spoke. In a brief but powerful statement, he confirmed to the world what many had feared, that he had been living with AIDS. It was the first and only time he publicly addressed the illness. And less than 24 hours later, he was gone. Freddie Mercury died on November 24, 1991. He was just 45 years old. But in that final act, he did something no tabloid ever could. He reclaimed the narrative. He let the world know, not with scandal or spectacle, but with truth. And in doing so, he shattered the silence around AIDS, forced people to look, to listen, to understand, and that was only the beginning of his final legacy. In August of 1991, just 3 months before his death, Freddie Mercury stepped into the garden of his London home, Garden Lodge, and stood in the sunlight. He was visibly frail, a shadow of the powerful figure the world once saw commanding arenas. But in his eyes, there was something unshakable: defiance. That moment was captured by Jim Hutton, his partner and constant companion in those final years. The image is now legendary and haunting. Freddie wore a loose, patterned shirt and pale trousers. His frame was alarmingly thin, but his stance was proud. He was holding on to something far greater than physical strength: dignity. He knew exactly what that photo represented. It wasn't for fame. It wasn't for sympathy. It was one last message whispered to the world without a single word: I'm still here. That image went unseen by the public until after his death, but when it finally surfaced, it shattered hearts. It humanized the man behind the legend in a way that no concert or interview ever could. No stage costume, no lights. Just Freddie, quiet, brave, unfiltered. In those final days, the mansion that once hosted wild parties became a place of reflection. He spent hours with friends, listening to music, painting, and talking with his beloved cats, each one named, loved, and spoiled like royalty. These small rituals, these quiet comforts were all he needed. And then there was the decision that defined everything. He stopped all medication, not because he was giving up, but because he wanted to leave on his own terms. It was the ultimate act of control in a life where control had often been an illusion. He passed in peace, surrounded by the few who mattered most. While Freddie's final act was one of grace, not every chapter in his life closed so cleanly. Some were chaotic, self-destructive. Even legendary partnerships weren't safe from the storm. In the early 1980s, Freddie Mercury and Michael Jackson, two of the biggest names in music, came together in what should have been an unstoppable collaboration. The idea was electric. Two icons, one studio. The possibilities were endless, but almost immediately the dream began to unravel. Freddie, deep in the throes of drug use, brought with him a volatile energy. Cocaine had become a part of his routine, fueling the highs but also feeding the chaos. During recording sessions, his erratic behavior clashed violently with Jackson's perfectionism. Jackson, who avoided drugs and maintained strict studio discipline, quickly grew uneasy. The breaking point? Freddie allegedly brought a drug dealer into the studio. Jackson was horrified and furious. 3 tracks were started. There must be more to life than this. State of Shock and Victory. But none were completed. The tension became unbearable. Jackson walked away. Freddie returned to his world. And just like that, one of music history's most promising collaborations dissolved into silence. Years later, the tracks would resurface, unfinished, fragmented pieces of what could have been a masterpiece. Fans were left wondering what kind of magic the two might have created if personal demons hadn't gotten in the way. This collapse wasn't just about missed opportunity, it was a brutal reminder. Even for someone as brilliant as Freddie, addiction didn't care about genius. It didn't care about potential. It took what it wanted and left wreckage behind. But in the wreckage, Freddie still found a way to rise, again and again. Freddie Mercury may have left the world in 1991, but in the decades since, his presence has only grown stronger. In death, his influence became something even he might not have predicted: untouchable, immortal, and global. The immediate aftermath of his passing sparked a wave of grief unlike anything the music world had seen. But it also lit a fire. Within months, Queen and their longtime manager, Jim Beach, launched the Mercury Phoenix Trust, an organization devoted to AIDS education and research. It wasn't just a memorial, it was a mission. One that has since raised over $17 million across more than 1,000 projects in 57 countries. Then came the tribute concert in April 1992, held at Wembley Stadium. It wasn't just another show, it was an exclamation mark on his legacy. Artists like David Bowie, Elton John, George Michael, Annie Lennox, and Guns N' Roses came together to honor Freddie's life, not through tears, but through thunder. The world tuned in, over 1 billion people across 76 countries. And just like that, Freddie Mercury became the face of a movement, a man who, even in death, could bring the world together. But the true impact of Freddie's legacy can't be measured by money or concert attendance. It's in the whispers of his voice still playing on radio stations. It's in the younger generations belting out "Don't Stop Me Now" without ever having seen him live. It's in every artist who dares to be different, flamboyant, vulnerable, or unashamed. When the Bohemian Rhapsody biopic hit theaters in 2018, it exploded into pop culture. It didn't just win awards, it sparked a renaissance. Suddenly, teenagers who didn't grow up with Queen were obsessed. Freddie's face was everywhere, on murals, magazine covers, TikToks. His story struck a chord. The immigrant outsider who took the world by storm. The quiet boy from Zanzibar who ended up changing music forever. But his legacy wasn't just built on fame, it was built on truth. Freddie lived openly behind closed doors, and even in silence, his life became a protest. Against shame, against conformity, against the idea that anyone should apologize for who they are. His refusal to be defined by his illness helped rewrite the narrative around AIDS, forcing society to face the fear and bigotry it had long ignored. He gave permission to an entire generation to live loudly, love fully, and never dull their shine for anyone. He made queerness powerful. He made it beautiful. Freddie Mercury didn't just entertain the world, he changed it. And somehow, even now, he's still doing it. There are rock stars, there are legends, And then there's Freddie Mercury. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't always kind. He battled demons, addiction, isolation, the burden of fame. But he never faked it, never played it safe, never toned himself down to make others comfortable. He sang like he had something to prove. He performed like every show might be his last. And in the end, that's what made him unforgettable. It wasn't just the voice, the outfits, or the outrageous confidence. It was the honesty, the raw, messy, heartbreaking beauty of being entirely himself. He lived with intensity, he died with dignity, and he left behind a legacy so massive it still echoes through every arena where Queen is played, every pride parade where his name is shouted, and every teenager who looks in the mirror and finds the courage to be different. Freddie Mercury didn't just leave behind a catalog of hits, he left behind a challenge. Be bold, be wild, be unapologetically you. He burned bright, and he burned fast, but he never flickered. And now, decades later, the flame still hasn't gone out. Freddie Mercury's story isn't just one of music, it's about resilience, rebellion, and living without apology. If this video moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more untold stories, lost footage, and deep dives into the legends behind the legends, hit subscribe. We've got more coming that'll change the way you see music forever. Drop a comment below. What's your favorite Freddie moment? We read every one.